When you hear the name Capcom, what comes to mind? If you search Capcom on YouTube, you may see a ton of videos of their fighting games. And you may love that series, Street Fighter or Capcom Versus. You may also be a fan of Monster Hunter or Ace Attorney. Or perhaps you are holding your breath waiting for the next installment in the Mega Man franchise. Clearly, Capcom is, historically, a multi-franchised juggernaut on the video game scene, with a storied history. This video tells a little bit of that story from the perspective of a consumer who can say, Capcom and I grew up at the same time. We are about the same age. Now, there is a lot of information from the business side of things. Is the company succeeding or failing? Is the franchise dead or alive? No pun intended. And there's a lot of strong feelings about the decisions some companies make, whether it's a secular, legal, or story decision. But I'm not going to get into all that. I'm just going to tell you about the games I liked over 30 years ago. So with that being said, let's start with Disney. When modern gamers think of Disney and video games, they may think of Kingdom Hearts, a collaboration of Disney and Square Enix characters. But way back in 1987, Disney had their first game on the Famicom. Not their first video game ever, and not their first collaboration with Nintendo either, but their first game on the Famicom, called Mickey Mouse Adventures in Wonderland. This game was developed and published by Hudson Soft. However, to get that game published in the United States, Capcom entered the picture. A few changes to the game were made, and it was released in the United States as Mickey Mousecapade. This was one of the first Capcom games I and my family ever played, and since it was Disney, it was one that we kids loved to play, although very challenging. For Capcom, this was the first of many games based on Disney characters. So from the NES glory days all the way up until the Super Nintendo glory days, if we saw a Disney Nintendo game in the store, it had the Capcom label on it. Because if it was Sega Genesis, it was not developed by Capcom. And we enjoyed the game. Chances are you did too. There's a very popular indie game in recent years called Shovel Knight. Have you played it? Shovel Knight's gameplay draws heavily from a 1989 Capcom game based on Disney characters. And have you ever heard this song attached to a meme, reel, short, or TikTok? This song is from that same 1989 Capcom game, Ducktales, a beloved title in the hearts of longtime gamers everywhere. So much so that it was remade in 2013. Nintendo Power listed Ducktales as the 13th best NES game and in 2012 placed it 44th in their list of the 285 greatest games of all time. But Disney was not the only company Capcom found success with through their licenses. They made games based on Marvel Comics, a relationship they still profit from to this day. G.I. Joe, Alien vs. Predator, all of which I haven't played. But two other licensed games we did play, based on movies that are just overflowing with 80s flavor. One was Willow. To use the term loosely when describing how much its story deviates from the movie would be an understatement. But the music, composed by the same lady who composed the soundtrack for Mega Man 3, is one of the best soundtracks on the NES. And the gameplay builds on the foundation that Zelda on the NES laid. The other title was Little Nemo, a game and subsequent movie that partially shaped my definition of whimsical. The original source material was a groundbreaking comic and animation from the early 1900s. The game itself came to America before the movie did. It's a platformer that has great music and an above-average difficulty. I still haven't beat it myself. It's like a Kirby that can't float. Licensing for Capcom was not limited to characters from movies, TV shows, and comics. One of their games featured an animated mascot for Domino's Pizza, the Noid. Normally portrayed as an antagonist trying to prevent a 30-minute pizza delivery, Capcom's Yo Noid portrayed the Noid as a playable hero. Using video games in an ad campaign isn't unique to Domino's, but the fact that the Noid was such a bizarre character and the game was actually pretty good made this title memorable to me. But enough about licensed video games. We all know that Capcom developed powerhouse franchises on their own. Mega Man, Bionic Commando, and Street Fighter are the oldest of these. In fact, at one point my young mind noticed that a lot of the games my family enjoyed bore that same red label on top. And because of that, whenever we went to the used game store, I would look for that label when my dad would let us pick out a game. That was a simpler time back then. I don't think there is a single game developer that I would seek out like that today. But anyway, even outside of the franchises, there were one-off games made by Capcom that my family enjoyed as well. Section Z was a true product of the 80s. It presented non-linear gameplay and a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up and allowed the player to fire both left and right, which was somewhat unique for that time. Of all the games I have, this one is the most like entering a time machine and returning to 1989, watching my dad or brother play it. Legendary Wings was also innovative. It was a vertical overhead shooter, which was a dime a dozen in the 80s, but we enjoyed it because it was two-player simultaneous, it had power-ups, and those power-ups would increase the power of your weapon, change your appearance, and allow you to take a hit or two without dying. Most games of that genre at the time were very unforgiving, and one shot would cause you to lose a life. The final game I'll talk about is one that I have yet to go back and beat. Do you have one of those? You played just enough of the game for it to leave an impression on you, but never got the chance to finish it. For me, that's Street Fighter 2010. This game was just cool. It really doesn't have anything to do with Street Fighter, but Capcom gave it the Street Fighter name to garner attention for it. They even changed the main character's name from Kevin to Ken when they brought it to the US, and added a line about him being Ken from the Street Fighter series. But it really isn't him. But the game itself was action-packed, quick-moving, and free-flowing in its controls for an NES game. I still have the cartridge, so one day I will attempt it, after I clear the other 33 games in my backlog. These days the video game scene is saturated. To focus on just one company would be to limit yourself. And with my current backlog of games, I don't normally pay attention to the latest and the greatest. But like I said, this video was just a trip down memory lane. A very diverse period of time for Capcom. But each of these titles I've played or watched someone in my family play is a fond memory. And I can't help but get a warm feeling of nostalgia and reminiscing about that time period whenever I see that dark gray cartridge with the little red label on top. Thanks for listening to An Old Gamer.